Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly, and today I wanted to give an update about my low-key project to read 23 classics in 2023. Now, if you are new to my channel, or relatively new, then hello, welcome. If you're not new, then welcome back. For those who are new, I am Shelly. My name is Shelly, and I love books and reading. I have a particular interest in classics, like the ancient classics, all the way up to modern classics, and books that might eventually become modern classics. I just have a vested interest in sort of the vague terminology of classics in literature. Now, if you find yourself enjoying this video and you are not yet subscribed, I would encourage you to subscribe, stick around. Without any further chatting, I am gonna go ahead and get into the meat of this video. So I made a video at the end or the beginning, at either the end of 2022 or at the very beginning of 2023, and it was entitled 23 Classics in 2023. And in that video, I explained, or I had a very loose TBR of classics that I wanted to read this year in 2023. And it is the only project I set out for myself this year. And I wanted to really update you on the shape of that project and how it's going so far. And I think I've made it clear, and if not, I'll make it clear now that the books that I chose for that TBR, it's very loose. I own a ton of classics, like a ton of Penguin classics, a ton of ancient classics. I own just an absolute boatload of books, and a lot of them are unread, and a lot of them would be considered classics. So I have a lot to choose from, and so my TBR is very loose. With the one I set out at the beginning of the year, it's very, very loose. So I wanted to update you all on that project. So I have currently read 16 classics. So I'm going to go through the 16 books, some of which are actual classics and some of which are very loosely termed classics. I'm going to hopefully rank all of them, and they're going to be in a loose ranking. It's like a tier ranking, right? I could tier rank them. Oh, I just didn't think of the app. I'm not going to pull it up now. And it's going to be books that didn't work for me. You know, it's going to be kind of like the star rating system, more or less. I don't have any like 1-star books, so it'll start with like books I didn't like, books I thought were okay, books I thought were solidly good, and then favorite faves at the very top. So starting at the bottom, books I struggled through this one, and it was Moist Sand and Gravel Poems, and this is bought by Paul Muldoon. It was originally published in 2002, and it didn't win the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, which made me feel comfortable to put it in this classics list. And it was in my video, 23 Classics in 2023, and it was okay. It was all right. I struggled through it. I think some of the poems, and I've already decluttered it. I've already unhauled it. I've given it away. Some of the poems were really interesting in terms of the wordplay and the playfulness with language all around, but for the most part, I was on the struggle bus throughout that whole book. The next book that I really didn't care for, it was St. Joan by George Bernard Shaw. Now, since I have read St. Joan, I found out that the more famous play is Pygmalion, which is the play behind My Fair Lady by George Bernard Shaw, which I think I would get along with a bit better. But instead I saw St. Joan, and I saw that George Bernard Shaw had won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and I was curious about the author, and it did nothing. It did nothing for me, meaning that after I've read it, I just don't think back on it it's almost like it was deleted from my brain. It did not stick. It is like the opposite of a book that sticks with you. I have forgotten about it completely forgettable in some respects. in other respects. It was neat to visit the character of Joan of Arc in a play, and I think that character is interesting on the whole, but the play didn't illuminate anything that, well, I mean, yeah, not really. Like, it didn't give me anything new. Like, if I really search my brain, I'm like, okay, it does have value. Like, it has value, but I didn't get a lot from it. So yeah. St. Joan was originally published in 1923. And then the last book that I actually would probably yank off this classics list, but I thought it was considered a modern classic, and I would only yank it off because I just didn't get along with it, and it was Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood. It wasn't a terrible book. But it didn't work for me. It just didn't. The writing was beautiful, and maybe it should be, this is probably my transition into like the okay books. It just didn't work for me, and I wanted it to work so much more than it actually did. So yeah, I guess I should tell you a little bit about what Alias Grace is about. Alias Grace is about the story of Grace Marks, who is in prison, and there is some ambiguity, quite a bit of ambiguity, as to whether she actually was an accomplice for murder or is completely innocent. It brings up a lot of interesting questions, but again, it just didn't work for me. This was first originally published in 1997. The next book that was just okay was the Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. This was originally published in 1924, and it was okay. It was interesting. It was about a young man struggling with the idea of Calvinism, and whether something is destined to happen, predestined, the idea of predestination, and how it happens. It was interesting. The structure was really fascinating. Some of the characters were really, really fascinating. But ultimately, it's one that I wish would have stuck with me a bit more, and ultimately hasn't. And when I mean stuck with me a bit more, it's just like I forget almost that I read it. I do. And then when I really think about it, like, I enjoy going back and like ruminating on what I thought and the themes and revisiting it. Like, I don't think it was a waste of my time or anything. For the ones that I say that like they just didn't stick with me, but I just like, sometimes I'm just like, I have to look at my list in order to remember that I have read it, which is weird sometimes. You would hope that something deemed a classic would have stuck with you a bit stronger than sometimes what it does. So sometimes that's me, sometimes that's the book, and the mixture of both. So I'm just reporting back on, where I'm at with all of these as of now at the end of August, beginning of September, that date range. Two really short books that I would consider were good. Slightly forgettable. Sometimes I forget I read them, but I look back and I smile because those books they were interesting. Some of the details really stuck with me. One of them was a reread, and that is All Summer in a Day by Ray Bradbury. It's just a few pages. It's so short, and it was originally published in 1954. It is a science fiction short story. You'll have to read it. It's worth it. It's very, 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 very short. But I do like to have an accurate accounting of everything that I read, and I do think it's worth the read. The other book that I would say was really good, sometimes I forget that I read it, but when I do think on it, it gives me a lot of juicy meatiness to think about. And it was the Recitative by Toni Morrison. It's a short, one of like Toni Morrison's only short stories, and it was originally published in 1983, and it is about the two friends, one of whom is white and the other who is black, and the way, like, these friends, they sort of bump into each other at different points in their lives. Or that's how Toni Morrison wrote the story. And as you check in with each woman, their lives have changed in dramatic ways, and it's really kind of interesting to see the parallels and the parallels of these women's lives and the way that they diverge. It's again very short and very, very interesting. I quite enjoyed it. But every once in a while I do forget. Like, if you would have asked me off the top of my head, depending on my mood, have you read a Toni Morrison book this year? I would have said no. That's completely untrue. Now we are at the solidly good books, like the books I really enjoyed. I don't think that they're absolute favorites, but they are super enjoyable. As you can probably tell, I'm inserting a lot of book photos because the books that I don't really like or cannot foresee myself rereading or don't spark joy in some way, I do get rid of. So I've gotten rid of quite a few of these books that I have read. But anyhow, one of which is the third poetry collection that I read by Sharon Olds, The Living and the Dead. It is really good. She is I think she won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry. She's a very emotional and deep thinking poet. She's a confessional poet. Sometimes my jaw just hits the floor at her brutal honesty about her life and the way that she can really manipulate words in order to paint a vivid picture. I would say that The Living and the Dead was not quite as impactful as Stag's Leap or Satan Says, the other books that I've read by her, but I did really, really enjoy it. Let me think what the next one is. The next one would be Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. I own the book, I just didn't grab it. Anyways, hopefully I'm showing you a lovely picture of it. This is my second Daphne du Maurier book, and I loved it. I thought it was great. It is extremely atmospheric, lots of like a solid mystery, great characters, and just Daphne du Maurier has a way of making her setting a character, and she writes incredibly moody books. And I would say that she's got a knack she's a great writer. I would love to read everything she ever wrote. She kind of teeters into like the spooky. Some of her books are mysterious, that sort of teeter on like a bit horrific, but never ever going over the edge of being like, I would never consider her books a horror book, like that of horror, but there are some elements of horror that I feel like she borrows from, and she does just enough to build the tension. And she did it with Jamaica Inn, and it was great. It was great. I really enjoyed that book. I had to get up anyways, so I have my copy of Jamaica Inn right here. A little late though. Anyhow, the next book that I really quite enjoyed was A Month in the Country. It's a soft, unassuming, beautiful book about a World War I vet who spends a month in the English countryside and his experiences and interactions there. I really enjoyed this. Oh, I haven't been saying when things were published. Oh my goodness. Jamaica Inn was published in 1936, and J.L. Carr's A Month in the Country was published in 1980. The next book I would consider to be Scarily Bleak, which is why it doesn't make it into my top books of all time, but it was really good. It was very effective. It was very scary, and it is Ethan Frome by Edith Wharton. It has to be like the bleakest book I have ever read in my entire life. Not sad, bleak. Like, wow. I don't know how she did it, but she took it to this place that made me sad about humanity. I mean, like, it was just, it's hard for me to talk about, but if you can, it's the story of Ethan Frome. I'm just going to leave it there because it is one that you have to discover on your own. But I will say, whoo, it is bleak. First published in 1911. Okay, the book that's my transitional book. I do continue to think about one of these plays all the time. And that is, I have the 3 Theban plays. Antigone, Oedipus the King, and Oedipus at Colonus. I would say the least impactful one is Oedipus at Colonus. It's just, I don't know, there's just something that, it lacks a little je ne sais quoi. However, Oedipus the King is all about the way we think about fate and why things happen in our lives. And it's sort of more particularly like, why do bad things happen to good people? And you see the ancients struggle with this concept, and just how fascinating that is. And then Antigone, I really loved. So Oedipus the King was probably the one that sticks out in my mind the most. But Antigone is really an impactful play as well, because I just was really impressed by the main character who stands up for what she believes in, even though everyone is telling her not to do a certain thing, and yet she does it. Like, she puts her beliefs over that of what is possibly more right. There's a lot of interesting questions, and I think about her character is a really wonderful character, and I really enjoyed reading about Antigone and finally knowing all about her. And so I just loved it. I loved it. But yeah, so the 3 Thief and Plays is going to be my transitional books between books that I loved and my favorite faves of all time. One of my favorite faves, so I have 3 favorite faves. One of which is The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey. This is a mystery novel. It's a historical mystery, and if I describe it to you, it's a yawn fest. But once you get in here, it's fascinating. It's really good. It's very modern. Let me go. Keep on. This is all over the place. So this was first published in, it says that Sophocles lived in 496 BC, so ancient here. This is less ancient, but it reads as extremely modern, and she develops a modern technique, Josephine Tey does, in this book that is still used today, and it's just fascinating. This was first published in 1951, and it was really good, really good. So if you haven't read Daughter of Time, just fantastic, a really great mystery. I would go in kind of blind, and if you are a fan of the Plantagenets, this is your book. Another favorite fave that I read this summer was Lonesome Dove. This was great. This was great. It's like everything you would want and more in a book about the Old West. I wonder if this ranks so high because it's pretty fresh in my memory. Some of the greatest literary characters of all time in this book. So good. Larry McMurtry, who wrote this, just had a knack for creating fantastic characters, wonderful, amazing, interesting, deep, and complex characters. Really good, and just would have everything you would ever want in like a book about the Old West, like a Western novel. It's just great. It's a fast-paced, like off to the races, doesn't ever stop, never a dull moment kind of book, and it's done really well. And when I think about this, it puts a smile on my face. And if you are reading this and you're like, Shelley, I want to know your favorite character in this book, it was Augustus, Gus. I just developed such a massive crush on him. I just really enjoyed him as a character and thought he was fantastic. First published in 1985. And then, of course, for all of you who are regular viewers of this channel, you're probably screaming at me knowing what my very favorite book is this year. It's my favorite book, it's my favorite classic, it's the one that I love so much, and that is George Eliot's Middlemarch. Just a fantastic, amazing, on so many levels, masterpiece. First published in 1871 and 1872. Amazing. I just love this book so much, with such a fiery passion. And part of it was just the way that George Eliot developed the narrator's voice in it all, but also because I think in the mid-year book freakout tag, I said that Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead Demon was my favorite character. now that I've gotten away from that book a little bit, I do think he's a fantastic character and a really well-developed one and a really interesting one. But Dorothea in this book was a character that I just so deeply felt like I understood some of the moments that she went through. I truly sobbed my eyes out during some parts of this. It greatly affected me, and just like the compassion I felt for some of the characters, and the depth of humanity that George Eliot was able to write in this novel was incredible. I just loved it. I thought it was brilliant. And I will be singing this book's praises probably for the rest of my life because I loved it so much. Absolutely unforgettable. Yeah. And then I wanted to end with, where do I think this project is going and how do I think it's going? I'm right on track. I have read, because we're in the 8th month, I should have read about 16 books. And I have read 16 books. I am going to be finishing up 2 more classics by, a week's time or so. And I'll talk about them in wrap-ups or, I'll talk about them at some point here on the internet. But I don't want to talk about them yet right now. And I think I'm on track to finish at least 23 classics in 2023. I do think that if I was very strict with myself and I could only choose books that are older than me, like if that was a cutoff date, then I would definitely not be doing as well as 16, but I'm not going to be a stickler about it. And I did some of the reasons why I continued to count Moy, Sand and Gravel and Alias Grace, even though they were quite modern, is because I put them in that video, the 23 classics in 2023. So I'm just trying to stay consistent with my own channel, y'all. But overall, it's been a wonderful project. I've loved it so much. And I am just always ever so interested in the through line of literature. But more importantly, I think that reading from all different kinds of, I just think there's a richness to the art of literature. And to snub older books or to only read in a modern era, I think it would be denying myself some of that richness that exists. And so I just have so much pleasure reading classics, and doing a very low-key project like this to read 23 classics in 2023 really helps me remember and put a little, just enough accountability on myself so that I don't just sort of flit and flutter around this, the books that are being published now. And ultimately, it's a very gratifying thing. I wouldn't do something if I didn't like it. And of course, I love this project, which is why I keep on doing it. Okay, I'm going to stop rambling, but thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all in the next one. Bye!